Oh dear. The third season of The Toys That Made Us recently came out on Netflix. It had a lot of hype leading up to it, largely due to the lineup of toyline histories being looked at. My Little Pony, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, pro wrestling, and last but not least, the Power Rangers. Tokusatsu and Power Ranger fans were on red alert, as the episode promised to feature a few big names, as well as the prospect of a rare mainstream dip into general Tokusatsu history. I watched it, and there's some stuff we need to talk about.
Very confusing.
Henshin!
So, get comfortable, computer boys and girls. For Vintage Henshin, I'm Mike Dent, and we've got some unpacking to do with the toys that made us. There are three main areas of contention for me with this episode: the quality of information in some spots, glossed over and wasted subjects, and its overall presentation. Having to really hold my tongue right now in regards to that third area. So let's start with the first one: quality of information. Whether it be through editing or the interviews themselves, there are some bits of history that were either flubbed or left unclear. Also some flat-out fabrications in the name of artistic license. Here's a few that I really want to elaborate on.
What he did was he created a character named Kamen Rider, which was the first Henshin hero.
Well, yes and no. The answer to this depends on how deep you want to dive into Japanese superhero history. See, Kamen Rider was the progenitor of what would become known as the Henshin boom. That's the time period when Japanese television was filled to the brim with human-sized transforming superheroes. But by 1971, when Kamen Rider first aired, the idea of a transforming hero wasn't totally unique to it. Up to that point, Japan had already seen two Ultraman shows, Spectre-Man and the live-action adaptation of Osamu Tezuka's Ambassador Magma. And if we really want to talk about the first true transforming superhero on Japanese television, that honor goes to one of the all-time greats. A creation of Kohan Kawauchi, Nanahiro Kamen, or Seven Color Mask, was the first superhero TV series by Toei Company. The show revolved around a young detective who was a master of disguise, being able to assume one of 7 different personalities to fit any situation. But in moments of danger, the detective assumes his 7th disguise and true alter ego, the titular Seven Color Mask. Fun aside, Seven Color Mask was an inspiration for another of the all-time greats of Japanese pop culture. Go Nagai's manga and anime heroine, Cutie Honey. So to say Kamen Rider was the first Henshin hero can be a bit of a stretch, depending on how deep you're willing to go. But again, you can only go so far in a 45-minute documentary that's not even totally focused on the subject. Oh, speaking of manga,
where work was underway on an all-new superhero tokusatsu, created by the man who wrote the book on superheroes. Literally, like he wrote heaps of them.
Ishimori was the Stan Lee of Japan.
While I do get the good intentions behind this statement, I can't help but feel like it's something of a misplaced generalization. Shotaro Ishinomori was known for his superheroes, but he is just as well known for his non-tokusatsu hero output. Things like Genma Wars, The Flying Phantom Ship, Cyborg 009, the Fushigi comedy series even. The episode's narrative that Ishinomori was the Stan Lee of Japan feels more or less like a shorthand answer that doesn't really quite fit. I mean, if anything, I'd give that honor to the previously mentioned Kohan Kawauchi, as a lot of his creations went on to form the groundwork for later heroes.
Parting ways with Bandai and Toei Studios is a big change for Power Rangers.
False and a bit of a misconception. With the Hasbro deal, Power Rangers and Saban broke away from Bandai, and Bandai alone. Toei Company is still in the mix. They're still producing the Super Sentai series, and still providing the source material, only now for Hasbro. Also, there's this bizarre insinuation through the editing of some interviews that the iconic 8-inch Power Ranger figures were a Japanese creation foisted upon America. Unless there's some large nugget of information that's never been made public, those figures were American-made. Oh, and last but not least,
be it the first Sentai toy.
But why? Why though? Okay, right, moving on to the second major area of contention from me, glossed over and wasted subjects. The first offender of this section, talking about the origins of the toys. The thing you'd think they'd go into greater detail about. Leopardon from Spider-Man is mentioned as being the groundwork for Super Sentai Mecha. But what of the other innovations afterwards? Dai Denjin being the first transforming robot, or Sun Vulcan Robo being the first combiner, which paved the way for that whole gimmick to begin with. This may sound like nitpicking, but it becomes slightly stressful because they had Tsuyoshi Nonaka right there, and he could have gone into that greater detail. He's one of the all-time greats in terms of Japanese toy design, the former lead designer of Plex, the design firm that works with Super Sentai and Kamen Rider shows. But instead of talking about those sorts of things like what went into designing Daijujin, they just relegate him to the odd, vague mention of gimmicks and the occasional English one-liner.
It's moving time. It's a robot of an animal form. There are different toy safety standards in America than Japan.
Very confusing.
Also, the Night Flight English parody dub of Dynaman was completely omitted when talking about the early attempts to bring Super Sentai to America. Although I can understand maybe Toei putting their foot down and not wanting to talk about it.
Hey, fishhead! Name this tune! Flipper! 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 No one in the sea! Is Domo then?
Ew!
Well, do you know what it is? We'll pose while you guess! Everybody hide!
And though it's seen on screen for a fleeting second, there's no mention of Saban's media empire in terms of all the spin-offs. VR Troopers, Beetleborgs, Mystic Knights of Tirna Nog, none of them mentioned whatsoever. I'm surprised they'd even take the opportunity to go full circle with the Tokusatsu thing and talk about how they went back to Kamen Rider with Saban's Masked Rider.
Ecto, phase, activate. If that's the way you want it.
But with that all said, I felt one of the biggest missed shots of the episode was the chance to go all in, or as much as you possibly could for a 45-minute episode, on the full Marvel Toei partnership. There's no mention of the significance of Battle Fever J's origins with Captain America, nothing about how Spider-Man was originally going to have guest starring heroes before the sponsors won out, just Sun Vulcan. Because, hey look, Ball Monster! Get it? Because balls! Get it? Do you get it? Do you get it? And that brings me to the third and final gripe area. The overall presentation. Here's the thing, up until now, I've liked the toys that made us. I think their Transformers episode from last season was their best one to date. It paid tons of respect to Takara Tomy and the original Japanese toy makers. You could tell there was a lot of love put into it. The Ninja Turtles episode that preceded this one also had a lot of love in addition to some fine storytelling. So you can't fault fans for hoping for the same level of quality prevailing in this episode. What we ended up with was a documentary that couldn't make up its mind whether to focus on Power Rangers the show or Power Rangers the toy line, along with a general feeling that no one really cared about this the same way. And there wasn't a whole lot to convince me otherwise. Look, I get that Toys That Made Us has a tilt towards humorous presentation to try and keep things interesting, but this episode felt like a flat-out mockery at times.
First, acquiring the rights to Toei's most recent Sentai series,
Jewel Ranger. How's that for a coincidence? Jewel Ranger, there you have it.
the plan was simple, if not entirely orthodox,
To combine and become a Megazord,
which you can then combine with
the Dragon Zord,
to make,
Mega Dragon Zord.
then toss in a
Titanus.
which will give you
Ultra Mega. Now I'm confused.
Very confusing.
those robots, like this one called Shinga Getai, Singa Getai.
Also, the 5 billion Transformers running gags.
And he would just
Transform.
Oh, that sounds familiar.
There was no TV show to back them up.
Unlike these Japanese robots.
We get it, you're fans! Let the joke die! And then there's this moment that especially felt like it was making light of the subject matter.
I was a bit devastated because I felt like I had birthed a baby and then had to leave it. which is exactly what happened.
But don't worry, Power Rangers' new parents would safely guide the brand towards adolescence. Or would they?
I'm sure it wasn't meant to poke fun, but the editing did nothing again to convince me otherwise. Speaking of which, oh, the editing. Yeah, this factor bugged the daylights out of me. Aside from the incredibly choppy and chaotic, crazy Japan focus of the tokusatsu section, the quality of footage in several shots was something of a crapshoot, either being halfway decent to incredibly poor resolution YouTube rips. The highlight of which being the one commercial that was on screen with an unedited watermark. There's also no sense of continuity, and some clips randomly are thrown in just because. When the episode talked about Sun Vulcan, for instance, for some reason it kept going back to Go Ranger. When they show Saban discovering Super Sentai, specifically Bioman, it becomes this mashup of footage that somehow also has Bicrosser, which wasn't even out in 1984, and the theme from Superhero Operations? And the cherry on top of all this, the heavy use of fan subs. Specifically, the fact that no one bothered to actually take the subtitles out, opting to completely leave them in. I mean, at one point they even used the same torrented rips of Japanese Spider-Man that used to be on Marvel.com. Hell, there's a part that uses both Zyuranger fan subs and the official Shout Factory subs not even a minute apart. I wouldn't be so down on this if it weren't for my personal experience. I know YouTube clips were utilized for this in addition to the fan subs. I often do the same thing for my own projects, but at least I have the common sense to know when something looks too bad to show. And it doesn't take a whole lot of effort to go through and actually remove the subtitle tracks when re-encoding things to work with them. From a production standpoint, it's not the best look, and it just reeks of laziness. A laziness that only exacerbated the other flaws I mentioned, and really left me with a bit of a bad aftertaste. Overall, if you're a fan hoping for a non-YouTube production quality history of things, you're not gonna get that here. Casual fans, I hate saying that term, you'll probably get a lot more out of this episode instead and not have as many issues. When it's all said and done, the Power Rangers episode of The Toys That Made Us is the farthest thing from the worst thing ever. There are some good parts to it, but it's still a very shallow dive of a documentary. And unfortunately, one of the weaker episodes to date. And it's a real damn shame. In the wake of the research for Ultra Rewind, we take a look at a forgotten world, a place of obscure heroes and monsters. Rare tokusatsu shows and films brought to American home video and lost to time. But in uncovering them, will we be able to escape this world in one piece? Find out next time on Vintage Henshin, Side Story 1, The Lawless VHS Zone. さあ、来週もみんなで見よう!